Today is all going to be about how to get your bundled specs with a Catalog API. And we'll talk through those terms if you're unfamiliar with them. We'll talk about what is the Catalog API in general, what is a bundled export, and why is it helpful. Talk a little bit about Workspace Tokens, the primary mechanism for authenticating with the Catalog API. I'll show you how that all works, and then share with you some of my notes and resources that I think just might be helpful context as you get started. So what is the Catalog API? It is Stoplight's very first API. And with that came a lot of foundational work around authentication and logging and metrics and so on. But in short, the Catalog API provides programmatic access to the bundled export of the specification or schema, allowing easier integration with your workflow, pipeline, and downstream tools. So to say it another way, the Catalog API allows you to extract OpenAPI files or JSON Schema files directly from your projects. What is a bundled export? Because that is ultimately what the Catalog API will be giving you. A bundled export is a completely self-contained specification or schema that minimizes repetition and intelligently resolves and organizes those references. So there are lots of different ways to reference or dereference an OpenAPI file or any given YAML file or JSON file. We've chosen to, with many complex schemas and OpenAPI files, you'll have references to outside sources, external references. When you perform a bundled export, we pull in those external references, many of which may be references to component libraries or design libraries in Stoplight. Maybe they have masking, but we'll pull those in, and instead of putting them directly in line to where you've referenced them, we'll instead smartly add them to the components or the definition section, depending on if you're using OAS 3.1 or 2.0. We'll put those files, that content in there, and then reference it within the same file. That way, your file stays small, it's easier to read, and you can continue to reuse those references in multiple places throughout your API. So talking through that a little bit more, here's kind of an example. At least in Stoplight, you would have something called a component library. That library may have a bunch of shared models that you'll want to use, things like your error envelopes, or maybe a user model that is going to get reused in multiple places. Or maybe something like a purchase order model, so on and so forth. There's lots of examples. Here, let's just think about a user model that is referenced and used by your inventory API, your payments, your shipping APIs, so on. And what will happen is on the left, you see what is essentially an external reference to that component library. That's that Stoplight protocol that you see down in the bottom left. And it includes overrides to account for masking and other kind of nice features that aren't necessarily built into OpenAPI. At the end of the day, though, you need a working document to use in your downstream tools. And so on the right, this is an example of what you would actually see in an export from the Catalog API. There's still a reference, but that reference rather populates, it points to the component section that is now populated with your, in this case, a shared user model. Now, what does this look like in practice when you're using the Catalog API? The URI is very straightforward. You're going to start with the base path of api.stoplight.io. That'll be the same whether you have multiple workspaces or just the one workspace. Your first resource is a project, so you'll need that project identifier, and I'll show you how to get that from the user interface right now. Then you can choose to either fetch your information, your file by a specific branch name, which is nice and convenient, but will always point to whatever is the latest on that branch. Conversely, you can go ahead and give us a commit hash, and we'll go ahead and find out, get the latest, get the content that is available on that specific commit hash. Then you're going to be doing the export function, so that's kind of the export resource there, and then add your file path. And that file path can include folder and subfolder structures as well, and needs to end with either a .yaml or a .json file to find. So that's the URI. what is everything else that is needed in order to complete that request? Well, the biggest thing is obviously authorization. Stoplight has chosen to use Workspace Tokens. So this is a bearer token or kind of an API key that works that gives you complete access to read all of your project contents in your workspace, and it is a long-lived token. So the idea is that this token could be useful in your CI/CD pipelines. It wouldn't expire unless you decided to manually refresh it, and it has complete access to everything that your pipeline would need access to. Configuration for that is very straightforward. You're going to go to your workspace settings screen. Now, because the access that this token has is fairly broad, it can't change any content or data right now. It can only read it, but it can read all projects in your workspace, including even private projects in your workspace. And so for that reason, only workspace owners can currently create these workspace tokens. In the future, we're thinking about exploring ways that every developer can go ahead and create their own developer token to access the resources that they already have access to. But for phase one here, just to kind of unlock the CI/CD potential of this export API, we've started with workspace tokens, which we feel has the broadest reach while having kind of appropriate security precautions. Once you create that token, you'll just need a name. We list out the permissions that token is going to get, but those are static. You can't change those permissions at this time. In the future, you may have an opportunity to choose to create tokens that can do maybe read-only access, or tokens that can specifically change some certain set of files or category of files. Then later on, you have then once you've specified those things, you go ahead and create your token, and it shows up here. As it says on the screen, this token will never expire, and you also never see it again. So you want to make sure that you go ahead and save it, copy it, put it into a secure vault or password manager so that this doesn't get lost. Great. Well, let's just dive into that as well. So I'm going to show you a few requests, but first let me show you some of the content that I have set up for this demo. I've got two projects. This is my main project with the inventory API, the payments API, the shipping API. And then on this other tab, this is the component library. And if you're in a professional or enterprise plan, you should have access to component libraries. Here's where you can create something like a shared user model to later reference in some of your other endpoints. So if we go over to Swagger Hub, first I need to show you how to get that project identifier. Going back to any given project, you'll see this gear icon. And from here, this is that project ID that you're going to need. Right now, it says that it's useful for Elements Dev Portals, but that'll be updated soon to show that it's also useful for the Catalog API. Once you have that, you also need to go ahead and create a token. Again, go to Settings, scroll down a ways. Here you'll find the Stoplight API. You can find tokens you may have already created here. You can see when they were last used, helpfully. If you click them, notice that you cannot see the token here anymore. Again, only workspace owners are even able to get this far. If you want to create a new one, you go through that process, click Add, give it a name, create the token, and then here you'll have it right here. So here I am over in the Swagger Hub Explorer. In case you guys haven't heard, SmartBear recently acquired Stoplight. And so we're getting reacquainted with all their tools and infrastructure. And I thought this would be a great opportunity to dive straight into Explorer and also show you guys how this new product works as well. So Explorer allows you to manually configure any API request. You've got authorization settings. You can set the protocol and the verb, all pretty straightforward from a kind of request maker that you would see. Then there are these spaces where essentially you can save those requests for later and organize them into folders and subfolders. So here I plugged in this specific project. I have, as you can see, I've got exports for the inventory API, the payments API, and the shipping API. If I were to hit the inventory API, you can see I get the content back here. Now, we give you the content exactly as it is, either in YAML or JSON format, depending on what you specify in the accept header. So if you have it stored in YAML and Stoplight or wherever, the Catalog API can actually do the transformation during the export. So if JSON is more useful to you in whatever context, then you can use that. When you fetch this information, you can see exactly what I was talking about in terms of how it's used. This one uses an item model that is already populated here in the components section. And then in the item model, it was referencing a component to the shared user library, which has been brought in here as well to the shared user model. Just to show you how the original document looked, we go into code view here. You can see originally this had an item model referenced here, and then here's that Stoplight external reference also, and that is not present here. So it took the Catalog API to pull that content in to give you the file that has all the content that you need for, again, gateway configuration, test harnessing, whatever you think is necessary. This is another one with the payments API. Again, pretty straightforward. This one directly references the shared user model. So in this case, there was no component section here at all. But then once you make the request, you'll see that it shows up here. It gets pulled in as you would expect. Also worth noting is that there's this internal record. Stoplight has this xinternal true, which in the user interface you can specify in the form view right here. You can specify individual endpoints or entire models as internal. When you do that, the idea is that they won't show up in your public-facing documentation. These endpoints or models are for internal use only, and marking them internal will essentially hide them. Now, the Catalog API is kind of expected to be an internal tool. And so by default, those internal resources will be visible. You can set a query parameter to hide those things by just setting include internal to false. And in fact, I have a quick example of that here as well, I think. Yeah, so we have our own, Stoplight has its own request maker. This is what we call try it. And this is actually the Stoplight API documentation itself. Here I am exploring using the export a project file by branch. I've got a token, set up everything that I need. When I make that request, you'll see that that endpoint is no longer here. It is only the one public payment record endpoint and not the internal record endpoint at all. And again, that is accomplished simply by setting include internal to false. Let's see, last but not least, we do support other OpenAPI definitions, or rather versions, as well as different multiple JSON schema versions. So when you send a request and do a very similar kind of Catalog API export of an OAS2 document that has external references, we'll bring them into the file just as we did before, but instead we'll follow the OAS2 nomenclature and put it in the definitions model instead of the components model. This should be the same whether you're using components library or the legacy design library. Legacy design library supported a few other things that we're working on into components library, things like sharing parameters, and just other attributes that you would find in the API. Basically, anything that you can reference from an OpenAPI document, the Catalog API should be able to pull in and either directly kind of assign the value in line or find the appropriate place for it to be reused if it's something that fits in a definition or in a component. I definitely encourage everyone to browse the Stoplight API documentation. It has information around authentication, making a request, versioning, errors and rate limiting, everything that you need to kind of get started and understand what kind of responses that you'll expect. All of our errors come in the standard problem JSON format. They'll include helpful information like a trace identifier, an instance, a static type. If there's anything about these error messages that aren't necessarily clear or you think could be improved, please definitely give us that feedback. Stoplight is also going to be versioning their APIs. This versioning scheme has only just been defined. There aren't yet multiple versions, and we hope not to have multiple versions all too often, but sometimes a break and change will happen that it may be necessary, and we'll put out a blast when that ever happens. But essentially, we use date-based versioning. The current latest date is 2023-7/12 when we released the Catalog API. And there are a bunch of things that we feel like we can change, add, that won't necessarily result in a break and change. If you want to better understand how we decide when to version or not, that's all on this page. And then lastly, we do have rate limiting as well. In the response, you'll see various headers for rate limits. You'll have a specific limit that we set. You'll have a countdown for the number of requests that you can make. And then we also have like a time until that limit resets. So this is mostly just to protect our infrastructure to make sure that any runaway script doesn't end up exporting more than we can handle and by extension kind of affect other customers as well. If you end up bumping up against that rate limit, again, let us know and we'll figure it out and see if we can't make an exception or otherwise kind of work out why there's so much traffic. Okay. So that's about it when it comes to the Catalog API. Again, you can fetch by branch name or by commit hash. The idea is that if you have a very fast-moving CI/CD pipeline with multiple builds kind of making their way through, you'll want to be sure that you point to a specific commit hash that is relevant for that build, so that your kind of racing pipelines don't conflict with each other if you're both making changes to the API. Last but not least, there's a few resources I wanted to share with you. Here are the error codes and things that we expect that you could receive back. I don't think I mentioned this, but the Catalog API requires either a pro team or an enterprise workspace plan. So make sure you're on either one of those in order to use the Catalog API. That's essentially how we kind of gatekeep the workspace token creation mechanism. Which, by the way, you can create up to 20 workspace tokens, which should be more than you need for any given workspace to integrate into various pipelines. And for those at enterprise scale with multiple teams, maybe this would be useful. If you need more than that, definitely let us know. If you're one of our on-prem customers, know that your workspace, there's only so many workspace tokens you can create. I think that number is 3 or 4. So again, if that proves a problem, let us know, but that's kind of how our licensing worked out at this moment. There are some OpenAPI specs that we will fail to export because we are processing the export and analyzing it and dereferencing things as it makes sense and reorganizing it to optimize the output. There are opportunities for that to fall flat if that OpenAPI document is particularly bad or has a lot of errors. We do our best to fix errors. There are things like nullable that are tricky between the various OpenAPI versions, and so we've taken some pains to kind of smooth over some of the most common pain points and just kind of roll with it. But there are, at the end of the day, some catastrophic errors when it comes to OpenAPI that if you're simply missing a server path or you're otherwise kind of have very malformed YAML or JSON that we won't be able to recover appropriately, and you may see some errors like 400 or 422, indicating that we are simply unable to parse that document. If something like that happens, I suggest you just run Spectral against it, boot it up in Studio or independently run Spectral, see what kind of errors that document is producing, and try and focus on fixing some of the more egregious errors. Don't worry about the warnings. We're fine with those, but some of the errors can definitely be problematic. If you feel like you should be able to perform an export, but it's not working for whatever reason, I encourage you to reach out to us through our normal support channels, including Discord, or directly emailing your support representative, or tweet us. We'll find it either way. But let us know you're having an issue. Here's just another example of that error, since we covered it earlier. And here are some of those additional resources that I was talking about. We have things called export guidelines that talk through some of the transformations that the Catalog API could do on the document. All these transformations we consider to be syntactically identical. So that means the end document should mean exactly the same thing and produce the exact same results if you were to forward it to an API gateway, to your SDK generator, or to your test harness. If any of those things, those downstream tools fall down, we've done some extensive testing, but if we've missed something, let us know if a particular SDK generator or version that you're using is not compatible with the way that we're exporting or is otherwise causing problems. Take a look at that documentation that's there. And of course, if there's other kinds of Stoplight APIs that we want to see, go to our roadmap and submit an idea. That's a direct link to all of the product managers' brains here at Stoplight. We keep heavy tabs on those. And I am currently looking for more excuses to add more Stoplight API functionality. So whether that's fetching more project information, like programmatically getting the project ID, or if that's just being able to create projects via the API, or create and manage users via an API, or download activity log reports. If there's something useful in the Stoplight data and you want easier access to it and you think an API would fit the bill, please let us know and tell us why you think that would be valuable. We'll see what we can do. Well, that was short and sweet. I hope everyone enjoyed the Catalog API demo and overview. Hopefully this gives a better understanding of bundled export and why we've chosen to make some of the decisions that we did. Some of the edge cases and added features around the Catalog API, such as including internal or performing transformations or bringing in external references. We covered a lot in a short amount of time. So I think at the end of the day, this is one of those things where you just need to spend some time with it, integrate it with your CI/CD pipeline or your downstream tooling, and start seeing the rewards of this kind of automation.